Tonight, massive disruption in Portugal and Spain after a major power outage. With the sun setting soon, the race is on to restore supplies. A cyber attack's been ruled out. Instead, a rare atmospheric phenomenon has been blamed. Also tonight, ahead of local elections in England, parties go on the attack over illegal migration. As Sky News understands, more than 10,000 people have now crossed the Channel this year. Our political editor Beth Rigby's been with Keir Starmer on the campaign trail to talk about Labour's first big electoral test since the general election. Plus, the government looks like it's headed for a clash with trade unions over public sector pay. I'll be joined live by the General Secretary of the National Education Union to find out why. And as Canadians go to the polls with Donald Trump's trade war looming over the debate, we'll look at the parallels for parties back here in the UK. And after a moment on this very show went viral online over the weekend, we'll talk about silence. Tim Montgomerie and Jardine are both never lost for words. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, first tonight, I just want to bring you the latest on the power outage crisis across southern Europe, because large parts of Spain and Portugal have been left without power for several hours, and it could take up to a week to restore some services. And as you'd expect, the blackout has caused chaos, with trains at a standstill, airports closed in major cities. Internet connections and water supplies have also been affected, with a rare atmospheric phenomenon blamed for causing the outage. Well, our science and technology editor, Tom Clark's been following the story for us and joins us now. Tom, what more can you tell us?
Well, it's still a bit of a mystery, really, as to what's caused this outage. The Spanish Prime Minister was up a couple of hours ago saying there is no conclusive information about a cause so far. Yet we've got the Portuguese power grid operator blaming something called induced atmospheric vibration or variation. We're not quite sure. There's there's something lost in the translation there, for causing disruption in high voltage power lines in Spain. Yet it's a little unclear, our power grids operate in extremes of weather, temperatures, winds, even geomagnetic storms can fry them from time to time. None of those things were clearly evident. There was a big difference in nighttime and daytime temperature today in Spain. That can induce changes in the power pylons. If you ever stood underneath a pylon, you can hear it humming, can't you? That kind of buzz noise. Well, that's the 50 hertz of the alternating current whizzing through it. There are phenomena that can happen due to temperatures or atmospheric events that can affect the conductivity of those cables, that can subtly change that frequency. If that happens, it can send things haywire on a grid. But it's likely there had to have been more than one single event to cause an outage of this enormous scale. Otherwise, these things would happen all the time. And what we've probably seen here is, one part of the grid went down, plus another problem, and that leads to a cascade. As the supply and demand balance is upset, power plants have to be shut down to protect them from damage. Customers have to be cut off through local power cuts to try and balance it. If all of that happens faster than grid operators can respond, you can get a cascade effect, like dominoes falling, circuit breakers go across the grid, and it spreads. Having a big decentralised grid like Europe has, interconnected grid across the EU now, usually makes things more stable. There's someone with power nearby who can bail you out. But it's also an example here, actually, of when things do go wrong, it can spread across borders. And we obviously saw that happening from Spain into Portugal, or possibly the other way around, we're yet to find out. And then also affecting parts of the south of France. There was also a dip noticed across the entire European grid, but it was resilient to that. So big questions about the cause, what it means. We're piling lots of new renewables onto the grid. Spain celebrated its first day of 100% solar electricity last week. And how to manage those different supplies as our grids sort of rapidly evolve. Big question, obviously a big question for Keir Starmer too, because he's trying to do similar for the UK grid. A reminder of how wonderfully, enormously important these things, how wonderfully complex they are, and how very reliant we are on them.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. Tom Clark speaking to us there. Now, this week we are counting down to Thursday's local elections in England, and illegal migration has been the issue that both the Conservatives and Reform have been going on the attack on today. So we can pick up now with our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's been following this for us. It's become a big issue, hasn't it?
It has, and this is the target that Labour didn't want to meet in this of all weeks. 10,000 people have now crossed the Channel in small boats so far this year. The official figures from the Home Office, which go up to yesterday, show we were 115 short of that number. But our teams on the ground have seen 4 dinghies laden with people coming in. This is a border force vessel collecting some of them, and we're seeing that because of the good weather, the calm seas, and the fact that people are being crammed onto these dinghies, we counted at least a couple of hundred people on board today, taking us past that milestone. And that means we have reached 10,000 quicker than in any other year since small boats started coming in large numbers. Here we are, 2025, 40% higher than this time last year.
And that's a big gap there. Sometimes you're kind of peering at it to see, but that is pretty clear.
It is, and if it carries on like that, I think we'll be looking at higher even than in the record year, which was 2022, and 46,000 people came. Now, we put this to the Prime Minister, who met with our political editor, Beth Rigby, while he was campaigning in Lancashire.
Is that we need to take down the gangs that are running the trade of putting people into boats. That's why we're passing the Borders Bill. That gives much greater powers to our law enforcement. The Tories actually voted against that, if you can believe it. But also what we've done is to put an intense focus on removing people who've no right to be in this country.
So he says that there is a plan to smash the gangs that legislation is going through at the moment, more data sharing, more patrols, tougher penalties for people smugglers. But as you can imagine, his political opponents have seized on this and says none of it is working. This is the Conservatives and Reform, who we caught up with today.
Starmer's claims to be smashing the gangs are laughable. They lie in tatters. He has presided over the worst ever start to a year in history for illegal migrants crossing the Channel because he chose to cancel our deterrent before it even started.
I mean, if this carries on at this rate, by the end of this Labour government, another 250,000 people will have come into this country, many of whom, frankly, don't fit our culture and will cost us a fortune.
And it's always a big issue, isn't it? But I guess particularly, of course, with those votes coming later this week.
Absolutely, and Labour have said they will get a grip on it. And while they've said there is no single silver bullet, they're bringing in a number of measures. I think we can expect, with a good weather forecast this week, those numbers to rise. We saw 250 people coming in boats on Sunday. This is not the week that they wanted that to happen, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Labour chose to make some immigration announcements this week.
Yeah, watch this space. Tamara, thanks very much indeed. Tamara Cohen there. Well, as Tamara was just saying, our political editor, Beth Rigby, was with the Prime Minister out campaigning in the North West earlier. She was talking about the challenge Labour faces at the local elections in England on Thursday. Let's have a watch.
Arriving in the northwest for the final few days of campaigning ahead of elections on Thursday that could prove very consequential for our politics. So it's a big set of elections this week. We've got local elections, mayoral elections, and the Runcorn by-election. That is a big Labour-held seat. Keir Starmer's Labour won the landslide back in July in the general election, but since then they have been sliding in the polls. This is the first big test to see if voters will press the change button again, and this time on Starmer's government, with Reform and Nigel Farage snapping at their heels. The PM visiting a health centre in Lancashire to announce the first freeze on prescription charges in 3 years in the hope it will win over voters. But today, the Prime Minister ambushed by pro-Palestinian protesters in footage we didn't see until after the event. The heckling a nod to wider disquiet. Prime Minister, it's the first big ballot box test for you since the general election when you won that landslide on the change message. But this Thursday could be pretty different. Your polling is bad. You're on the ropes at the Runcorn by-election. You're not the change?
We've got a really positive case to put to the electorate at the elections this Thursday. Record investment in the NHS, waiting lists coming down, investment in other public services. Of course, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be tough. Most governments after a general election face a tough set of local elections.
Boris Johnson did quite well in 2021, didn't he?
Well, 2021 was, we were in the middle of COVID and a vaccine was coming down the track, and I think we all remember what that was like.
NHS, better story to tell. You've put loads of funding in, the waiting lists are coming down, and that's clearly what you want to highlight. But the immigration record of your government is shocking. The number of illegal migrants crossing the Channel in small boats is set to pass 10,000 potentially today, and Reform are going to absolutely smash you up on it, aren't they?
The last government lost control of our borders. We have to now take the necessary steps. But also what we've done is to put an intense focus on removing people who've no right to be in this country.
Are you more worried about Reform than the Conservatives?
At the end of the day, Reform and the Tories, there's all this talk about them getting together and merging. I mean, if you're a Tory voter who doesn't want a pro-Russia foreign policy, how does a merger with Reform work for you? If you're a Reform voter that thinks the Tories failed for 14 years, how does a merger or coalition with the Tories work for you? Both sets of voters are being conned.
A PM as concerned about Reform as his old adversaries, the Conservatives, in a set of elections where the smaller parties are tipped to thrive. This, a flying visit to the Northwest. We caught up with him again on his way back to London. You said there just now about voters feeling conned by Reform and the Conservatives, but when I think about the last election, they voted for change, they chose you, and now they're feeling conned by you. Do you
look at the change that we offered. We said we would change the NHS by fixing it and making it fit for the future. Well, we're getting on with that. We're making that change.
The person you started talking about was Nigel Farage. You're really competitive. Do you hate the thought of losing to him?
I hate the thought of losing to anyone. You know that, whether that's politics or anything else. But what I think is important is the choice is clear. I mean, we've made our case, our positive case.
Runcorn by-election, do you think you're going to lose it?
It's going to be tough.
You're going to reset if you lose it? Cabinet reshuffle, or you just crack on?
We are getting on with a really good campaign, really good candidates, and we've got to fight for every vote.
A third of voters in England eligible to cast their ballots on Thursday, and politicians will be crisscrossing the country all week to win support. This may be a relatively small set of elections, but they really do matter. It will be the first ballot box test for Kebede as Conservative leader, and the moment when we see whether Reform's positive polling can turn into real power. And for Starmer, well, this is voters' first verdict on his government. But the elections are more than just about the ups and downs of individual leaders. It will also give us a sense about whether the two-party system, battered in the general election, really is on its last legs. The vast majority of council seats up for grabs this time around are Conservative held, but eyes very much on the PM too, with voters seemingly losing faith that he is the change. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Keir Starmer there in Manchester. I should say Beth is hoping to speak to the leaders of the Conservatives, Reform UK, later this week as well. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The political commentator Tim Montgomerie, member of Reform, and the Liberal Democrat MP Christine Jardine. Great to have you both with us. Good to have you here. It's a funny set of local elections, isn't it, in a way, because there are not that many councils that are actually having votes, and they're all in England, and the vast majority are being defended by the Conservatives, right? So I guess the pressure really could be, I mean, yes, on Labour, as always with the party government, but also on the Conservatives.
It could be because, as I think Beth mentioned there, the last time these seats came up was Boris was having the vaccination bounce. But we're quite confident, the Liberal Democrats, because we've won more than 700 seats in the last 3 rounds of elections. And I think this time the pressure will be on the Conservatives and on the government, because a lot of people are not happy. They're not seeing what they expected from this government. So I think we are going to see a lot of...
I quite enjoyed Davies kind of needling the Conservatives, saying that all you care about is fixing the church hole roof.
Oh, yeah, I mean...
As if that didn't matter, yeah.
I know. I mean, OK, so we fixed the church roof, but actually that's what communities want.
Yeah,
they want politicians
100%.
who will fix things and not just go out and say, oh, aren't we wonderful? So fixing the church roof does for me.
I mean, it's a test for reform as well, isn't it, right?
It's a big test,
because it feels like reform have been very good at piling on votes, but not necessarily great at converting those into seats and in elections and also local elections as well. So, you know, are you like a modern-day kind of organised party now?
Well, that's the real test, because one of the things that the Liberal Democrats were so good at the last election, and relatively, you know, normally a supporter of proportional representation, they almost did better. They got their vote out in key places. And Reform's a new party. Pardon?
We still support
I know you do. I know you're principled on that. But no, Reform is a party that's new. We don't have that sort of local organisation still. So the big test is, you know, we're getting about 25% in opinion polls. What I will judge Thursday on is, can we match that percentage of the vote? If we're sort of in that sort of ballpark, that's the kind of build we need to be really credible at the election.
And you've been out with Nigel Farage today, have you?
Yes, it was a complete coincidence. I was about to come up here to see you, Sophie, and I was visiting my local pub just for a quick one, and I was told by Nigel's visiting. So I ended up staying. That's why I'm as badly dressed as I always am. I wasn't quite fully equipped.
Didn't bring the tie.
But we talked about Runcorn, and it's going to be a tight contest. But one of the interesting things I said about that by-election was immigration, as your report, you know, is playing well. But I don't know that Christine will confirm this, but the winter fuel allowance is also a massive issue on the doorsteps. It seems like a long time ago for some people now, but pensioners are really still angry about it. And in an election, probably with a relatively low turnout, we know pensioners turn out, I think it's going to be proved to be one of the big mistakes that Labour made.
We'll have lots more from both of you throughout the programme. A little earlier, I did speak to the Technology Secretary, Peter Kine.
Well, it's taking steps forward and it's also delivering. So we have now calculated that the NHS app has saved 1.5 million appointments from being missed. So it is alerting people to appointments that are coming up. If people can't make it, they can cancel it via the app. So rather than actually having to go and sit on the phone or forget it altogether, the app is playing a really meaningful role in the functioning of the NHS. Now, people might think that that isn't a big thing, but when you aggregate that over to the whole of the NHS, it's 1.5 million appointments being used at the same time that we're delivering 3 million additional appointments, which is what we've done since we got into office. And you can see this is why we're making such big progress on the waiting lists overall, because of the investment and reform that's been led by Wes Streeting in the NHS. Just
listen to you there, you get a sense of the scale of this, because there is a lot of data on the NHS, right? And you know where I'm going with this. We know the US tech giant Palantir has been given a contract to kind of create a joined-up database of records. Can you understand why some people are worried about privacy?
I can. There is two dangers here. There is a danger that we use data and get it wrong. There is a second danger that we don't move forward, we don't use danger, and patients miss out. They miss out on having their scans being made available and shared between GPs and hospitals and clinics. They miss out on the opportunity for being able to book appointments, cancel appointments, to interact with their doctors via an app.
So you're saying that there is a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. Is that what you're saying?
So I've chosen, and we as a government have chosen, to embrace this technology, to bed in safety from the outset and make sure we get it right, because the bigger risk is that we allow the rest of the world to move on and we leave the NHS in the analogue age. We can't allow that to happen because it's not fit for patients. It would be a bad system itself, and it wouldn't deliver the value for money and the change that people really expect from their NHS. I've got to tell you, that most people are anxious that data is not being used wisely and assertively on their behalf than they are about it being used unsafely.
Look, this is all what you want to talk about today, right? You know, what you perhaps don't want to talk about is immigration. Sky News understands more than 10,000 migrants have now crossed the Channel this year. Several small boats picked up today. Are we in control of that border with France?
I am really keen to talk about this, and the government is very keen to talk about these issues. We have inherited a system...
You haven't done a great job. I'm not sure why you're so keen to talk about it.
Well, Sophie, we have increased returns by a third since the government took office. We are getting much more proficient at returning people who don't have the right to be here. We are laying the foundations. We are building the agreements with the French and other countries that people travel through, so that we can get a grip on the travel that people make across the continent through to Britain.
So you're keen to talk about the returns, but what I'm talking about here is the number of people making the crossing here. And this year so far, it is the worst since we started recording this. From yesterday, 9,885 people crossing since January. 2024, for example, that figure was just over 7,000. I mean, it's been increasing.
So we have been unfortunate in having a set of climatic conditions which has made it much easier to cross.
Some people would say that it's the pull factor. That's what some people would say. That's what the Conservatives would say.
There is no pull when we're returning a third more people than the Tories did. The Tories had a system which was reliant entirely on sending people to Rwanda, and they didn't send a single one there that wasn't a volunteer. So we have increased the returns by a third. We are bringing efficiencies into the system. We are making sure that the application system is dealt with much, much swifter. But we also have to tackle the horrific backlog that we inherited with tens of thousands of people that the Tories let into our country, parked in hotels and put into a no-man's land where they weren't even allowed to stay here and they weren't returned.
More people are crossing the Channel since you came into power than they have done since records began.
And we are making sure...
And if you're saying that you've helped the pull factor, then that's not what the figures are saying.
Well, listen, we've been in for 8 months. We inherited a broken system. We are fixing the system. We are bringing robust measures into that system, and we are increasing the processing time that people, when they do come here, and we are increasing the number of people who are returned when they shouldn't be here in the first place. Now, we are trying to make sure that a very complex set of circumstances through which people get through here, and the criminal gangs which deliver them here to our shores are tackled. We need agreement to do that with other countries and their criminal justice systems. The Home Secretary has been absolutely fulsome in her work with the French, with other countries, to make sure that we can have these cooperation agreements, and they will deliver. But right now, because of the climatic conditions there, it's making it easier to travel across the Channel, but we are tackling them once they do, and we are laying the foundations for a much swifter process to stop them getting here in the first place.
Can I just ask briefly on the youth mobility scheme, which I know you don't want to lump in legal and illegal migration to the same pot, but it does have an impact on numbers as well. So there's been lots of talk about reintroducing a youth mobility scheme, which would allow young people from Britain and the EU to travel and work in other countries. Is that something you'd personally support?
These are negotiations that are underway at the moment, and in any negotiations, when you enter into them with good faith, you allow your negotiating partners to come with what they want out of an agreement. We go in there with the things we want out of the agreement.
Do you like the idea, then?
And you discuss... It doesn't matter whether I like or dislike this agreement. They are part of negotiations, and we will put Britain's interests first. We will deliver a deal...
Sounds like a bit of a dodge to me.
Well, it's just I'm not doing the negotiations, and even if I were, I wouldn't be doing them with you. I wouldn't be able to do... And everyone understands why.
No opinions in the Cabinet. I get it.
Everyone understands why.
Speak with one voice.
Those Cabinet members who are doing the negotiations need to have the space to do so without me going on the TV and doing the negotiations in public. These negotiations are carrying on. They're really functional. They are very forthright, and we're tackling lots of the big issues that we want to get out of this, and we're trying to find areas of agreement. The very fact you're not seeing daily walkouts and you're not seeing daily collapses and the psychodrama of before is that we are assertively putting forward Britain's interest, but we're working in a really functional way with our negotiating partners across the EU, because they will benefit from the agreements that we will put on the table, and we want to make sure that those are mutual.
Talking about walkouts, some of the unions are threatening strike action over pay. The Times reporting the independent pay review body has recommended a 4% pay rise for teachers, considerably higher than the 2.8% that Rachel Reeves budgeted for. Now, I'm going to be very careful how I phrase this question, because I know you'll say, I don't want to comment on leaks, etc., etc. Will you follow the recommendations of the pay review body?
So we are now in the process of analysing the recommendations. I haven't seen them, so I can't even comment as to whether they're correct or not, but we do not comment on leaks, you're absolutely right. And it will go through the process in the functional, correct way. But what we are absolutely determined is to deliver value for money for taxpayers. We will have a grip on public finances, and we will deliver for workers.
See, the other thing that some of the teaching bodies are worried about is that if there is a pay rise, it will just come from existing school budgets. And this is the thing, isn't it? Because like more money for teachers sounds great, but then if you're a parent and you find out that it's being spent by cutting teaching assistants or getting less textbooks or stopping music lessons, then that doesn't sound so great. So would this be new money?
And this is the inheritance that we are trying to deal with, because the only settlement that we inherited was more tax or less spending. There is an alternative way, and that's to get growth into the economy. And we are doing everything, well, right? And we are absolutely working assiduously for it. The regulatory reform, the planning reform, the modernisation of our economy, the increase in R&D and innovation in our country by 8.5%. We are absolutely going hell for leather for growth for our country. And that is what will get us out of this vicious spiral and the horrible choice that we have to make because of our inheritance.
You can't guarantee that it won't be existing school budgets.
Well, as I said, you know, I can't come on to your programme and do the negotiations which are underway in government at the moment and need to go through the processes.
Understood.
When
Always
they come out,
but I understand what you're saying.
But when they come out, you know I'm never shy of coming on your show, and I'll be on here to explain why we've made the decisions we have. But I will say now that we are still in the process of making very, very tough decisions in order to get a grip on our finances, get our economy up and running again, and getting Britain back to its full potential, which it hasn't been for far too long.
OK, great to have you, as always. Thank you. Peter Carter. Right, let's bring in Tim and Christine again, shall we? I mean, so much to kind of pick apart from the interview. On immigration, do you have much sympathy with what he's saying there? It's like, yes, look, we're seeing increased people coming over here, but we're seeing more returns, and actually that's part of the solution.
I think actually Peter Carter is a brilliant communicator for Labour as well. I don't know why they don't use him more, actually, in terms of someone who gets his message across. Labour don't have many first-class communicators, but he's one of them. I think the deportations issue, it's why Nigel Farage last week announced a Minister for Deportations if he became Prime Minister, because what you do is, one thing is to sort of break up the gang, one thing is to try and deter people crossing the Channel, but is there a real punishment if you come to Britain, you don't qualify for asylum? No, so many people seem to stay here forever. And so deporting people, showing that actually law will eventually be enforced in Britain, that's incredibly important. So cracking this problem of these illegal sort of boat crossings in the Channel isn't an easy issue. But what we can control is when people are here, what do we do about people who have come here on the false pretence that they're asylum seekers?
What's your take on it all?
Well, I think we do need to clamp down on the gangs. We need to crack the gangs, and we need to stop it being worth people's while, smuggling people in horrendous conditions, putting lives at risk. None of us want to see people die in the Channel. But we also, it strikes me as odd at a time when we're trying to discourage people from coming here and encourage them to stay in their own country, that we've cut the international aid budget, which was, you know, a way of stabilising countries where there was problems, helping them out, providing foreign aid. And we've just made it more difficult for people across the globe. So we need to clamp down on the gangs here. We need to have safe legal routes that people can pursue, points in their own countries where they can apply for asylum. We need to do all of that. And it's not just as simple as, it sounds horrible, rounding people up and sending them away. That's just not the right way for me to go about things.
This isn't reform policy, so I'm going to go off message for a minute, but I completely agree with that on international development. I do believe that one day, at the end of our time on Earth, if you believe in God, I believe we'll meet God and he will ask us, what did we do for the least of people on this planet? And at the moment, as we sit here, well-fed and well-watered, there are people who are hungry in this world. There are people who are dying of diseases that could be treatable. And if we can't find, as a nation, to spend 0.7% of our national income on helping the most vulnerable people on Earth, I think it's a massive failure. And so, yeah, I'm probably not going to change reform policy in that particular area, but it does...
Have you spoken to Reform about it? Or?
Well, actually, what Reform say is that, and I think this is true, is there is a lot of waste in the aid budget, a lot of waste. And, you know, we see some of the charities and countries that are So I agree with that. I think we could spend the money better. But I think even then, I think we should be spending 0.7%. I think it should be a target.
I was at New York last month for the Convention on the Status of Women. And I met a lot of NGOs and a lot of volunteer groups working in places where they've lost US aid and are now terrified they're going to lose aid from us as well.
They're linked,
And
actually,
they're
because you
helping.
lose the US
Yep.
channel, the British
You lose
channel.
ours.
Yeah.
And they're dealing with people who have absolutely nothing in countries where there's very little capacity to help them. And that's why people get on boats and, you know, try and hang on to the bottom of lorries and things to come here. And we could cut it off at the beginning. We could help people at the beginning and stop them wanting to come here. And that, for me, is the key.
Really interesting to hear both of you on it. I love it when politicians go slightly off message, not because it gets me a line, but because that's when you know people are talking about what they really feel, right? Which actually, that's what we need more of, I think, sometimes. So, yeah, thanks. Very interesting chat to have. Now, we've been wondering whether we could be seeing more scenes like this one, because there's been a brewing government and trade unions row over public sector pay. Number 10 insists that there will be no additional funding for any pay increases above 2.8%. That's the figure recommended by independent pay review bodies. And it means if the government accepts the pay recommendations, as they did last year, some of the increases will have to be funded from existing budgets, which the unions say will then hit public services and raises the prospect of more strike action. Where we can talk now to our guest, Daniel Kebede, the President of the National Education Union. Great to have you on the Politics Hub. So there's been lots of talk about pay recommendations from the pay review body. If the government doesn't accept them, will you go on strike?
Well, firstly, we need to see the report from the pay review body published. We don't want to find out what pay recommendations are from pay review bodies through the press. And quite frankly, that's been the experience of the last 24 hours. And it was a feature of previous governments, and we were hoping for something different from this one. What's really important, though, is that we see an above-inflation pay award that is fully funded, that takes steps to address the crisis in recruitment and retention, because, of course, we can't recruit or retain enough teachers at the moment, and that is forcing schools into a crisis.
You say there that you want to see the full published recommendations, and I get that, of course, but I guess, you know, my question still stands. You know, if the government doesn't accept them, because the reports are that it could be 4% for teachers, which is more than Rachel Reeves has budgeted for, will you consider going on strike?
That would be a question for our executive and our members. I think it would be highly inflammatory, though, for the government not to accept recommendations from a pay review body if that pay recommendation is above 2.8%. We have to remember that this government were elected on the promise of change and with the promise of recruiting 6,500 new teachers. An admirable aspiration, but quite frankly, teachers need to be paid fairly to ensure that that happens.
I guess that what the government would say is that they would love to see more money for teachers. And look, you don't have to tell me that, you know, I believe like teachers are the backbone of this country. But what the government would say is they're having to juggle a very, very difficult economic picture. You know, we've just been talking with our panel about the cuts to the international aid budget, for example, which could help harm some of the poorest in the world. We've been talking about disability cuts. We've been talking about having to spend more money on defence, seeing what's happening in Ukraine. You know, do you accept that this picture may mean they can't do everything that they want to?
I certainly accept that the government has some difficult choices to make, but these are choices. And we believe that there is the wealth in this country to ensure that teachers and support staff, and of course doctors and nurses, can get the pay award that is necessary to ensure that our public services thrive. Of course, there are options for this government and for the Chancellor of the Exchequer, a wealth tax, a 2% wealth tax on those with assets over £10 million would raise around £24 billion. So there are other options available to government other than cutting health and education.
If, because you're very clear that you want this to be fully funded, and this does feel like an important point, because obviously they can pay teachers anything that they want if it has to be found within existing schools' budgets. If it is a pay rise from existing budget, what kind of cuts could we be seeing in schools?
Well, if you ask any head teacher now, or teacher for that matter, what efficiencies can be found after 14 years of Conservative austerity, The answer will be none, not without cutting jobs or resources, or indeed both. And you have to bear in mind, we've had a series of unfunded pay awards prior to last year. And that has meant that we just do not have the auxiliary staff, the support staff in schools. We currently have some of the largest class sizes in Europe, 1 million children being taught in class sizes of 31 or more. We need fairly funded pay awards to ensure that education can thrive. And unfortunately, education isn't thriving at the moment.
I am officially out of time in the interview, but there's just one other question that I wanted to squeeze in while I have you, if that's okay, which is about EdTech. Because if you've got a child in school, you probably kind of notice that an awful lot of learning is done not just online, but through apps, a bit like gaming apps where you can get stars for learning your timetables or whatever it is. What's your view on EdTech? Is this like a really useful tool, or is it something that we should be wary of?
So artificial intelligence and EdTech is something that will be a part of education in the future. But who owns it, who controls it, whose interests it operates in, a contested areas. Of course, you have Elon Musk, who thinks that we should just gamify education. I actually think that EdTech could be used to reduce workload, to do some of the bureaucratic tasks, to ensure that teachers have the time and space to focus on what makes us human. So this is all contested at the moment. And I hope my vision for EdTech is the one that wins rather than sort of Elon Musk's, to be honest, because I don't think that is a good direction of travel.
Really interesting. It feels like that's just the beginning of a longer conversation, but great to have you on Politics Hub. Thank you.
Yes.
You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Kemi Badenoch demands the rap trio Kneecap be prosecuted for allegedly calling for the death of Conservative MPs. What are the limits of free speech? We'll debate that next.
Three of us have become rappers.
You may know the words, but you don't understand the language.
There's one real for horse from Kyo.
Just go studio again.
Well,
Because rent beats.
you know, like. Well, you hear Abbey Roadie? Abbey what?
Now, this is the Irish rap trio, Kneecap. Earlier, Kebede demanded they be prosecuted after a video emerged of the band allegedly calling for the death of Conservative MPs. Downing Street said the alleged comments from the Irish-speaking Belfast group were completely unacceptable and the Metropolitan Police are now investigating. Well, Kneecap and Ms Badenoch already have a bit of history after she blocked a government grant to the group while she was business secretary, and Kneecap won a discrimination challenge over that decision to refuse them funding, the government conceding it was unlawful. Well, this is what Kebede Badenoch had to say on the campaign trail today.
I certainly think that there are grounds for prosecution. This is a band who I withdrew money for last year. They took the government to court. In between that time, we changed from Conservative to Labour. Labour gave them the money. I think that's completely wrong. What they did is abhorrent. They should not be glorifying terrorism. They are anti-British, but to actually call for people to kill their local MPs, I think is disgusting and they should be prosecuted. People are in prison for sending tweets that don't go that far.
Well, let's have a look, shall we, at some of the official reaction to this. Keir Starmer's official said Downing Street condemns the comments in the strongest possible terms. The Labour MP, David Taylor, has written to Michael Eavis, urging him to remove them from the lineup at Glastonbury Festival. And Scotland's First Minister, John Swinney, has called for the group to be removed from this summer's Transmit Festival in Glasgow as well. Right, let's bring in Tim and Christine, shall we? Christine, what's your view on this?
Oh, I don't think you could broadcast my view on this, to be honest, Sophie. We lost David Ames a few years ago, a Tory MP killed. And, you know, frankly, MPs don't need people to be encouraged to make their life difficult. We all have people making our lives difficult every day, our families' lives difficult. We have to have security now. And you do feel uncomfortable in a lot of situations. And given the opportunity, people will get at you in any way that they can, which has changed dramatically even in the almost 8 years I've been an MP. So to say something as irresponsible as this and as nasty as this is, for me, unforgivable. And I just resent that we're giving them the publicity that this was probably aimed at getting. But I would hate to see them think that it's in any way acceptable or that politicians will in any way just allow it to pass.
Tim?
I agree with all that. We mentioned earlier that I was with Nigel Farage in Salisbury earlier. And, you know, he's had the milkshake attacks. He goes out every day, and this is true of David, it's true of a lot of politicians. They go out every day on the campaign trail to meet voters. It's part of how our democracy works. But all of them know in the back of their mind, the David Ames story that Christian, Nigel has to be surrounded by security. He does not know at any moment someone's going to come out of that crowd that he's talking to and attack them. And I'm afraid when you have bans like this, in receipt of public money, for goodness sake, behaving like this, it is absolutely unacceptable. And it's been good to see on social media today, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Conservative, people from all across the spectrum just saying, this is unacceptable. And it's zero tolerance, you know, the whole philosophy that took off in New York was once you allow sort of small crimes to be tolerated like this, small abuses, they grow and grow and grow. You don't tolerate any of this. Because if you do sort of allow that sort of language, that sort of incendiary talk to enter our politics, I'm afraid there are bad people out there or people who are unwell who will take advantage of it.
Did they stop to think for a moment about David Amess' family when they said that? Or Kim Leadbeater, Joe Cox's family? Did they stop to think about the impact that would have on them? I doubt it. I absolutely doubt that they they thought about anybody other themselves in getting the publicity that would get. And as I say, that's the thing that annoys me, is that they are getting publicity. But hopefully the public will see that really they're not what they're cracked up to be.
Some on the reform side of the argument have talked about free speech before in these kind of cases. And I'm thinking about some of the online posts that people made around the riot saying that, look, this shouldn't be taken seriously. It's free speech. What would you say to that?
Well, I really am a free speech person. And I don't think... certainly the question of public money going to them, that shouldn't even be, you know, if Kebede not tried to take the public money away from them because they're incendiary language, I don't know why that was challenged in the courts. That's a whole another... I think the courts get too involved in a lot of these issues. And what I think we should have is we should have massive public disapproval of that kind of ban. And there shouldn't be a Glastonbury. That probably is one of the best things that could be punishment for them. They should lose their slot at Glastonbury. But I don't like... Unless it's... You know, there were some people whose last summer, what they were tweeting about, a direct connection. Was it Rochdale, the Holiday Inn, where asylum seekers were inside and you had the chance... Anyone who was encouraging the sort of violence against that, that's something I think could end up in prison. And it has to be where you can see a clear link between what's said and what happens. But generally, I'm reluctant to see the law getting involved.
I don't think that's free speech, though. I think... We're going to agree again. I think there is a line. And the line is when you have the freedom to say what you believe and what you think is right. But calling for people to be killed because of what they believe crosses a line. And it's, to be really liberal for a moment, it's the John Stuart Mill, the harm principle. Don't do harm to other people. That's doing harm to other people, potentially.
OK.
What Christine just said, I agree.
We're allowed to have a go. We don't mind that. Thank you both very much indeed. And, of course, you can expect the Kneecap story to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Saby, and The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Creer. Now, Canadians are voting in a federal election, overshadowed really by Donald Trump's threats to the country's sovereignty and also fears over his escalating trade war. The election's been described as a referendum on Canada-US relations, and the two frontrunners are the Liberal Party, led by the former governor at the Bank of England, Mark Carney, remember him, and the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre. Now, Donald Trump weighed in, posting on Truth Social, "Good luck to the great people of Canada. Elect the man who has the strength and wisdom to cut your taxes in half, increase your military power for free to the highest level in the world, have your car, steel, aluminium, lumber, energy and all other businesses quadruple in size with zero tariffs or taxes if Canada becomes the cherished 51st state of the United States of America. No more artificially drawn line from many years ago. Look how beautiful this landmass would be. Free access with no border, all positives with no negatives. It was meant to be. America can no longer subsidise Canada." There you go. Now, of course, there is a UK angle with polling here showing voters would prefer Keir Starmer to adopt a more Carney-esque, robust approach in dealing with Donald Trump. A Savanta poll found 35% of voters thought the PM had been weak in trade negotiations. Right, let's bring in Tim and Christine again, shall we? Tim, I find it quite interesting, a lot of the polling on reform voters and Donald Trump, who tend to have a much more favourable view of Donald Trump than others in the UK. What's your sort of take on, I guess, the looming Trump over Canada?
Can I slump my head in there? in my hands?
You're allowed to do that.
Well, look, I'm actually tortured on this because Christine will tell me, well, she told me so, and she kind of did, but there's so much... there is so much about what Trump did that Christine won't agree on that I still approve of, on net zero, on diversity, on deregulation. But where he's been on tariffs, not making a distinction between friends and adversaries, bringing all the tariffs in overnight, it's been crazy. And then bigger than that is where he's been on Ukraine. You know, there was a picture on the front of The Guardian last week, and it could have been my mum, a woman who was looking dazzled. She'd been in the bombing raids that had taken place in Kyiv. You know, the first. It really touched me. Yeah. And the idea that America, which I've always loved, the land of liberty, could not be on Ukraine's side categorically at this stage. I really do think Trump deserves some credit for wanting to bring this war to an end. There was no discussion of bringing this war to the end under Biden. It could have been a forever war. But then to look like you're blaming Ukraine for a war that was caused by Russia's invasion. Yeah, so I find it... I think there's a lot of good that Trump represents, but I'm afraid I'm beginning to think the negative outweighs the positive, and that's why I'm feeling so tortured about it.
Yeah, it's a safe space. Don't worry, no one's listening.
No one's listening.
You can have your,
I thought you had my interest at heart,
conversations.
I can't think of any good that Donald Trump represents, to be
No,
absolutely
no good
honest.
at all.
No, I
none at all.
can't. And I just, politically, I just think every time he says something, you think it couldn't be worse than the last thing he said, and it is. The first time he came up with this 51st state nonsense, I think that we all thought it was a joke, that he wasn't serious.
Yeah, I did.
But the more he goes on about it, the more I think he is serious. I mean, that's just tonight. That's incredible.
He's not. It would make it a lot less likely that he, he wins another election. Though, right?
Yeah.
No, he's not going to stand next time. But
we thought
they're
it was
not going to be the
unlikely.
most pro-Trump voters. If
We
he
thought it was
adopts
unlikely.
Canada.
We thought it was unlikely that he would win this time, but we didn't. We didn't allow for the fact that he was appealing to people who were completely felt disenfranchised and disconnected. And
I guess my point is, though, if he, Canada becomes part of the electorate, then. I'm not sure.
I don't think that would ever happen. I've spoken to some Canadians about this. And
I
can't see it ever
covered
happen.
Clinton v Trump the first time round for the Times, and they always used to say about Hillary Clinton's rallies, the applause was louder at the beginning of the rally than the end because she was boring, dull. Trump is an entertainer. Now the thing is, he does entertain. People
I
laugh.
don't find him entertaining.
You may
at
not,
all.
but I think we've got you down as probably against. I think we'll put you down as against. But a lot of people find
That's fair.
politicians dull and stereotype. And he entertains. That's partly why he's a success. What he doesn't seem to realise is when he talks about Canada, which is clearly for a domestic audience, he has transformed the outcome of Canada's election. So Paul Poilievre...
I don't think that's what he meant. I really don't think that's what he wanted.
He was the future of the right. And now he's lost to Mark Carney almost certainly. And Trump is having global consequences. And his entertainment, which works domestically, he's not aware of the international consequences. I really think he doesn't... America is quite an insular country at certain times. And I don't think they realise what happens domestically, how it has reverberations around the world.
Really interesting discussion. Now, on the issue of Donald Trump, his spokesperson has been speaking about the possibility of a trade deal between the US and the UK. This happened just before we came on air. Let's take a listen.
As for the trade talks, I understand they are moving in a very positive way with the United Kingdom. I don't want to get ahead of the president or our trade team and how those negotiations are going, but I have heard they've been very positive and productive with the United Kingdom. And I will say the president always, both publicly and privately, speaks incredibly highly of your country. He has a good relationship with your prime minister, though they disagree on domestic policy issues. I've witnessed the camaraderie between them firsthand in the Oval Office, and there is a deep mutual respect between our two countries that certainly the president upholds.
Donald Trump's spokesperson there talking about the prospects of a US-UK trade deal. Now, we had a viral moment on the Politics Hub last week when we were discussing the impact of the Supreme Court ruling that a woman is defined by biological sex. And we were talking about the implications with Dawn Butler, the Labour MP, and Simon Clarke, the former Conservative minister, when, actually the easiest thing is just to show you the video. Let's just take a look.
If trans men then have to use women's toilets, that's going to make women less safe, because how are you going to stop a man, a normal man, going into a woman's toilets and saying, I'm a trans man? And so I think we have to look at
I don't follow that logic.
Why?
Because the point is that we're saying that people who are biologically men shouldn't be using women's toilets. That's the point of this ruling, among other things.
But a trans man is biologically a woman.
Someone who's transitioned from being a woman to a man is...
And so they would then have to use women's toilets.
I think this...
And that's the problem. That is the problem, and that's what concerns me.
I'll be honest, this is something that we can talk about an awful lot more and debate an awful lot more. Now, that clip has since been viewed millions of times on the internet. I always know, by the way, when something from the show is taken off on social media, because my friends from outside Westminster start texting me about it. Obviously, it'd be nice if they actually watched the show rather than, you know, scrolling TikTok and Instagram. But hey, you know, that's what friends are for, right? They keep you grounded. But on a serious note, there is one thing that I would like to say about the moment that we just watched. Because silence is really unusual on television, it can feel quite awkward. And it is a cliche, but it is also true, because silence often speaks more than 1,000 words. And look, there has been some mickey-takey online, it's fair to say. But I would just like to speak in favour of silence, because silence often actually means someone is thinking and that someone is listening, which, let's be honest, we don't always get a lot of here in Westminster, you know, where people are very good at talking, not always so great at listening to what someone else is saying. Let's talk again, shall we, to Tim and Christine. I mean, look, it was one of those moments where it did take off. There's been a lot of discussion about it online. But, yeah, I guess I just wanted to speak in defence of silence, because it is... Some of these things are quite complex. We're not always the best at listening to other people as well. What's your take, Tim?
Well, you've spoken in defence of silence. I'm going to speak in defence of Simon to some extent, because I saw that clip. I was watching live as it happened, and I did not know how I would have answered either, actually, in that moment. And it challenged me. I hadn't thought enough about the issue. It's not an issue I generally venture into. And we were talking about this a few minutes ago, and it is better... It's really embarrassing for Simon, but actually there was a humanity in that. He didn't give a glib answer. He didn't try and answer falsely. And I think that is better than a politician saying something mean. And there was kindness is the great thing absent in so much of our politics, and he was thinking, and that's not a bad thing.
I agree, it's good to think, it's good to listen. But what really worried me about it was, why had that not occurred to him? If anybody is prosecuting a case, they should think about all the consequences. And to me, it's unthinkable that anyone who's been involved in the debate about this for the last 2.5 years hadn't thought about the consequences.
I mean, I guess in his defence, he's coming on to talk about... He wasn't coming on to talk about, you know, trans rights specifically.
No.
And
But you can make that criticism of me, and perhaps I deserve it, but it's an issue I've generally avoided. I've been very interested... Whenever I've thought about the trans issue, it's always about the protection of children. I think of an adult, you know, that's fine, but... So I've always been against the puberty blockers, etc. issue. So I would have been guilty in that position as well. And I think a lot of viewers would have been, actually, Sophie, as well. We haven't thought this through.
I'm going to have to ask now for a
silence.
Period of silence, because I think we are nearly... Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I'm actually wrong. I got my timings completely wrong. I've got another minute. Christine, keep going. We're always know exactly what's going on in politics, Hub. Always completely under control.
My dreams have come true.
100% professionalism.
I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to give
up. This will go viral now, you know, this moment.
This will.
A minute out on my timing is the end of the show. Who knows what's going on? We're doing a lot of talking.
Can I say something, then?
It's my turn.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm only going to say, I agree about the silence, that we listen, we need to listen more, but I think we need to know our issues clearly so that we don't get caught out.
Very strong. Thank you both very much. Always good to have you both on the Politics Hub. That's it from us. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. I think I got that one right, at least. Up next, it's a UK Tonight with Sarah J. Me. But I will see you tomorrow.